Welcome to the videos for Internet Scripting. In this course, we're going to be learning about web development. In particular, we're going to learn about the client side of web applications. Web applications are any kind of application that runs over the internet. So basically, they involve a web server of some type sitting out on the internet. And we have clients, all different kinds of clients, computers, tablets, smartphones. They make connections to our application on our web server. It responds with some kind of page that comes back to the computer, the tablet, or the smartphone. In general, the simplest kinds of pages are static web pages. Static web page is a page that's made. A request is made from a browser, and the browser is officially considered the client. So the web browser is the client part of our application. And the web browser makes a request using a protocol, HTTP, which is short for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. You've seen those letters in web addresses before, I'm sure. So the web browser makes a request using HTTP out to a web server. And generally it asks for a file of some kind. And the web server says, hey, I have that file, and it sends back an HTTP response and sends a file back to the web browser. And that's a static page. A static HTML file doesn't do anything except display information. Just a bunch of code. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So the markup language part is the part that just formats and makes the information being displayed on the page. It gives it some structure, and then it can also use CSS or cascading style sheets to make it look pretty, but it doesn't really do anything other than display static information that doesn't change. When we throw JavaScript into that formula, now we can make a request to the web server. And it still sends back a static page, but it's a static page with HTML. It has CSS and it has JavaScript so that the page can be dynamic. That means the page can interact, it can change, we can do things. People can click on things and they do have responses, and it all happens on the client side. But we can also do dynamic web pages on the internet, and we are not going to be dealing so much with the dynamic side of pages on the server side. We are going to be sticking to the client side. But let's look at how it might work for a dynamic web page on the server. So the web browser, again, makes an HTTP request from a web server. The only difference between this and a static page is the web server doesn't just send it back a page that's pre-built. In this case, a web server would take that request, that HTTP request, and it might ask an application server to run some kind of script based on that request. And that script could be in a language like PHP, which is a very common scripting language on an application server on the internet. Perl was before that. Python is being used a lot now. So there's lots of different languages that can be ran on that application server, including JavaScript. Some of the more modern application server programming languages use JavaScript on the application server side. But the application server might also make requests from a database server, and the database server will send some information, the results of a query of some kind, from the database back to the application server. And the script logic on the application server will combine the information from the database request into a web page and respond to the web server, which packages it up all nicely into an HTTP response back to the web browser. So this is sometimes called a three-tier architecture because we have these three things. Do note, though, that these servers don't necessarily have to be three different pieces of hardware. These servers could be one computer running some web server software, some application server software, and some database server software all on one box. the bigger the application gets and the more people it has to respond to, the more requests, the more chances that these three get split up just to make them more efficient. But in this case, we are going to be working with more of this model. We're going to be writing web pages so that when our web browser, which includes a JavaScript engine, so our web browser will run JavaScript automatically, our web browser will make a request out to a web server. The web server will respond with HTML files and CSS files, but also JavaScript files. And the JavaScript is what our pages that make our pages more interactive. We use some client-side programming in that JavaScript engine to make our pages interactive. So we are going to be concentrating on this client side of this model, writing HTML, writing some CSS, and writing the JavaScript language. The biggest challenges will come with our JavaScript language. HTML and CSS are pretty easy. The whole purpose of JavaScript is to interact with HTML and CSS to make dynamic pages. I shouldn't say dynamic because we just define that something different. To make interactive pages, that might be a better way to put it. So that's what we'll be concentrating, writing JavaScript to make interactive web pages.